do you limit the amount of time that your kids spend on mobile phones or on using electronic devices like laptops and tablets? Earlier this year, the French government banned Wi-Fi in nurseries, restricted its use in primary schools, but in Britain, the government says there's no consistent evidence that exposure to RF signals from Wi-Fi adversely affects the health of the general population, and therefore there's no reason why Wi-Fi should not continue to be used in schools and indeed in other places. Paul Lewis from Doncaster decided to take his 8-year-old daughter out of school in Doncaster because he believes Wi-Fi was affecting her health. He joins me now. Paul, what sort of symptoms was Jessica having?
Really severe headaches, and she would look, when her mum picked her up from school on certain days, she would look completely washed out, her face would be white. So on some occasions she'd have quite bad, skin would itch quite bad as well, but it was severe headaches that were the main problem.
How did you come to link that up with Wi-Fi and so forth?
Well, we didn't know that the school had Wi-Fi at first, and we didn't know that there were any potential health problems that this microwave radiation caused. And it was just by chance, really, about a few weeks after she first developed these symptoms, after returning to school in the summer, one particular September, I came across a few stories about other children around the world that had started having severe headaches when their school had introduced Wi-Fi. So I then tried to find out, and did find out that the school had Wi-Fi, and so I made the connection that way.
What happened next?
We spoke to our correspondent with the head teacher and told them about the problem. Initially they sort of switched off the router, the Wi-Fi router in her class, and they allowed her to use separate computers when they were doing computer lessons that were completely hardwired. That's what they did at first. And then there was quite a bit of correspondence between myself and the school, and I offered to pay for myself and my wife offered to pay for a survey to be done to measure the levels of microwave radiation that the Wi-Fi was giving off, but they didn't take me up on that. And I kept producing various independent studies that show that there was a problem, even though the government said that there isn't. But there's quite a lot of independent studies that do show there are health effects from it. And then we offered to pay for the school to be hardwired, so it wasn't needed to be used, but they didn't take me up on that either.
Was Jessica still being poorly?
Well, they moved the class, the desk that she was sat at was quite close to the Wi-Fi router, so that the levels of microwave radiation are higher then, so they did allow her to move desks so she was further away from the Wi-Fi router, and they switched it off when it wasn't being in use, so I think that helped.
Did you talk to your doctor or to medical people about whether there could be other reasons for Jessica being poorly?
Well, at first, when she started suffering with the headaches, her mum took her to the doctor, and they suggested having an eye test, and she had one, but her eyes were fine. And then the next suggestion at that time was just to give her painkillers, which didn't really help find out what the cause was. So first we knew nothing about the Wi-Fi problems. We didn't know the school had Wi-Fi, so we didn't know it could be a cause.
There came a point, presumably, when you thought, I'm not going to get any further with this with the school.
They did. I mean, and later on a GP did write a letter to the school saying that in his opinion the Wi-Fi radiation was the probable cause of her headaches and health issues. And I thought that would help the head teacher and the school governors actually, rather than just hearing it from me and reading the stuff that I sent from the local GP, that would have helped, but it didn't. And so when it got to the stage where, they weren't going to do anything about it, we decided with Jessica as well to take her out of that school.
What's happened next to Jessica and her education?
Well, initially we found a small private school that had no Wi-Fi at the time and still doesn't have any Wi-Fi. So that's what we did initially. Since she's sort of reached secondary school age, she's effectively homeschooled.
What do you make of the whole story, Paul? What do you deduce from your tale and from Jessica's story?
Well, it seems to be that a small percentage of the population are sensitive to this radiation, and they have health effects that are caused by it. Some of those people don't realise it's the Wi-Fi radiation that's causing it, but it is. Similar to sort of certain people that are allergic to certain foods, but most people aren't. So there's a small percentage that are, and I think there is not very much awareness that this could be causing health problems, and does for some people in the short term, and there are a lot of long-term consequences as well that are even worse.
And you're convinced it is this business of sitting with Wi-Fi that does it?
Well, for the short-term health problems that Jessica had, she only ever had the severe headaches at the school, and from what we know now, it was a particular day that she was worse, and that particular day was when most of the class were using Wi-Fi enabled laptops, and apart from one other occasion where she was in a building that was using Wi-Fi enabled dance mats and she had similar symptoms then, that's the only time that she's had this had the health issues with the severe headaches. So I can't say 100% it was definitely the Wi-Fi radiation, but I'm pretty sure it was.
The government says very clearly, don't they, that there is no evidence that Wi-Fi is harmful.
I believe that they say that there is no consistent evidence that microwave radiation causes health issues, but by their word in there, they know that there is some evidence. And when you actually look into it, a lot of the independent studies that are done that aren't funded by the telecoms industry seem to show that there is, and the studies funded by the telecoms industry seem to show that there isn't. And that's very similar to the tobacco industry that was very similar going back for decades. They produced studies that showed no problems with smoking, but other studies show that there was, so it's very similar tactics.
Paul Lewis talking to us. Dr. Erica Mallery-Blythe thinks that the government should reconsider its rules around the use of Wi-Fi in schools, and we'll speak to her after this. We've just been hearing from a dad from Doncaster who took his daughter out of a school in Doncaster because he was concerned that Wi-Fi was harming her health. Earlier this year, the French government banned Wi-Fi in nurseries and restricted its use in primary schools. In Britain, the government says there's no consistent evidence to date that exposure to radio signals from Wi-Fi adversely affect the health of the general population. Public Health England have told us that on the basis of the published studies and those carried out in-house, no reason why Wi-Fi shouldn't continue to be used in schools and other places. However, with any new technology, a sensible precautionary approach, as happened with mobile phones, is to keep the situation under review so that parents and others can have as much reassurance as possible. That's what they say. Dr. Erica Mallery-Blythe thinks that the government needs to reconsider, and she joins us now. Dr. Mallery-Blythe, when did you first get interested in this subject?
Around 6 years ago. My background's emergency trauma room medicine, so hospital A&E. But about 6 years ago, I noticed that there seemed to be escalating symptoms such as headaches, palpitations, dizziness, mood disturbance, etc., that were escalating in the general population. And then individual people, like Paul and his family, discussed with me their own experience that they had identified that they were getting these symptoms very specifically in response to radio frequency fields.
You've changed your own habits around using mobile phones and Wi-Fi as a result?
As a result of my reading, yes, not based on anecdotal evidence alone, but at that point I started reading a vast quantity of literature and was really shocked to find that the evidence was highly substantial. And by that I would say it dates back to the 1950s. We now have tens of thousands of research papers that show harmful effects at a cellular level, at a systemic level, and then links with medical conditions that are well defined. So when the government says that the evidence is not consistent, Paul's quite right to highlight that word. That's, I think, a carefully inserted word, which we wouldn't expect 100% consistency, because we're looking at biological systems and non-linear reactions. And so 100% consistency would be unheard of and extremely unexpected. But what I can tell you is that out of tens of thousands of research papers, 70% or thereabouts of non-industry funded literature, which thankfully is still the majority, do show cause of harm or demonstration of harm.
Right, it doesn't convince the government. Can you tell us some of the specific things that you think are caused then?
Well, symptoms like Jessica's headache certainly seem to be very common. And it depends how you look at this phenomenon, really, whether you look at a sort of molecular biological level or whether you look via questionnaires and things at people's symptoms as a result. And we see constellations of symptoms. Now, because these are broad-ranging and they do affect every system, some people have used that to sort of dismiss them and say, well, they're very non-specific. And I would argue with that because we know that radiation, by its very nature, affects all cells and therefore all systems are likely to be affected. So we would expect symptoms to be broad-ranging and potentially affect every single system. But on a cellular level, we can sort of tie those together. And I've put together some tables of cellular effects, but they're too numerous really to talk about on the radio. But I suppose specifically DNA strand breakage is something that's been a hot topic of conversation because that's linked with malignancy. And as I'm sure you know, this type of radiation is classified by the International Agency for Research on Cancer as a Group 2B, that means possible human carcinogen, because of those demonstrated DNA strand breakages, and also links with literature that show increased risk of glioma with heavy cell phone usage.
Right, can you explain in the simplest possible terms what it is that my phone or my laptop might do to me if I get sit near it or I'm in the same room or whatever? What's it do?
Well, like I say, it depends which sort of level you look at, but on a DNA level or on a cellular level, there are really a whole host of different effects that have been associated. It also depends which frequency ranges and intensities that you look at. So DNA...
What's he doing? Kind of giving things out, sort of poisoning me with stuff coming out of the machine?
Well, it's radiation. Now, many of us are au fait with ionising radiation, so that means X-rays. It doesn't knock electrons out of their shells, which is what ionising radiation does to induce some of its damaging effects. So in terms of mechanisms, there's a really large number of different mechanisms of damage that are being proposed. But I think what's more important than that really is looking at the fact that we do have this very large number of studies looking at lots of different areas and seeing different types of damage. So it's probably a sort of multi-mechanistic approach, and things like damage to the cell membrane, allowing calcium to flood into the cell and do damage to organelles within the cell. That's one of the mechanisms, for example. But there are many more.
France is one of the countries, isn't it? The only country to have banned it or restricted its use in schools and nurseries?
Yeah, there are lots of countries taking this far more seriously than we are and dropping their safety limits by several orders of magnitude below ours. And even those countries have people within them criticising that they're not protective enough. But we, unfortunately, haven't dropped our safety limits at all. And the ones that we use at the moment were not designed to protect against what we call non-thermal or non-heating effects of this type of radiation. What they were designed for is to protect against cooking, if you like, of cells, where you actually raise the temperature inside the cell, and we know that causes damage. But what we also now know, thanks to thousands of papers, is that even orders of magnitude below that level, when heating is not occurring, damage is occurring. And we need new biologically based guidelines to protect against those. Now, the government has given some precaution in that it states that under 16s should not be using mobile telephones except for essential calls. And it was very wise to give that advice, although, it's sensible to take that in context. Nothing magical happens to you at 16, and I would say actually that advice should extend to everybody. But we do know that children are particularly vulnerable for a long list of reasons. But what I am concerned about is we've taken that good advice and we've not used it sensibly to look at other sources of radiofrequency radiation. So the Group 2B carcinogen status refers to all of the other sources as well, including Wi-Fi, for example. And what children are being encouraged to do in school now is use both their mobile phones in some cases, but also tablets and computers very close to their body to do their educational work. And a tablet, for example, can have a higher, what we call SAR, or specific absorption rate, which is the measurement the government has chosen to use to look at exposure. It can have a higher exposure in terms of SAR than a mobile phone.
So, Dr. Mallery-Blythe, should we withdraw our children from schools? It's like Paul was doing. Should we take our kids home? Is it as dangerous as that?
Well, some parents, unfortunately, Paul is not alone. Some parents have been forced to homeschool their children because the children are actually symptomatic. That, I think, is a very, very sad situation that cannot be allowed to continue. When a child is having symptoms that have been documented in peer-reviewed literature as being related to this kind of radiation, we must take that very seriously. They shouldn't be forced to homeschool.
Dr. Erica Mallery-Blythe, thanks very much for joining us on BBC Radio Sheffield. Paul, who was my guest earlier on, is still in the studio. What do you make of that? Do you want to add anything to what she's saying?
The only thing that I'd like to add is really that people aren't aware of this potential problem. There are plenty of studies that show there's a problem and people just aren't aware of it. So one of the reasons I agreed to be in the Telegraph article and to do this interview is to try and increase that awareness. There is a problem here. It could be a really big problem. Some people, it's a problem straight away.
Do you feel at all like, I don't know, some of the people used to talk about stuff they put in the water, or kind of people think you're a bit balmy?
I think a few possibly do, but they should do the research, and then they'll find out that I'm not. This is a problem. Microwave radiation is a problem. The Wi-Fi uses a similar frequency to people's microwave ovens. Is it a good idea to pass that through your body? I don't think it is.
Paul Lewis,
plenty of studies show that it isn't.
Paul Lewis, thank you very much indeed. Getting reaction in, I'd like to hear what you think.